It means to strive to be better today than you were yesterday and better tomorrow than you are today. I had been given the opportunity to go do something outside of my regular life, outside of work, outside of my family, something solo. Just go on an adventure, hero's journey, maybe kind of thing. Being scared about being vulnerable, because coming out of some of these experiences can be very challenging because the world hasn't changed, but you've changed. So sometimes there's some disconnection in terms of reentry into society, into family, into friend groups, because you've had these realizations. You're now more compassionate. You love yourself more. You're making change in your life, and everybody's looking at you like, well, you look like the same person, but you're acting a little differently. It just made me feel safe, safe to express myself, to be who I am, to say those things that I haven't been able to say to others in the past.
There's a moment in every man's life where the mask starts to slip. You're still showing up, still performing, still providing, but on the inside, something feels off. You're feeling a little disconnected from your body, from your emotions, from the man you thought you'd become. I get it. I've been through those moments too. Today's conversation is for the man who's done everything right on paper, but feels like something is missing. My guest is Michael Tierno, a transformative guide who works with men ready to drop the mask and confront what's really been running their lives. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about finally understanding the truth. I'm excited to have you here. Michael, before we start to dive into the work that you're doing with men and the inner work that you're doing, I'm curious to know, what's the context that we need to know about your life that's going to set up this conversation?
Good question. The context of my life, one of my primary driver would be continual learning. So I'm always interested in pretty much everything and anything. And when something piques my interest, I go into a kind of a deeper level than just surface level. So I've had a lot of varied life experiences and worn a lot of different hats, and always tried to do my best to kind of explore that terrain, for the most part. But sometimes, I get tired of something, I move on to something else. So that's kind of like my biggest value. And then also not being committed to anything. I believe changed my mind on a lot of, big issues many times in my life. And I think that, with the intent of always kind of getting a little closer to the truth, knowing that I will never know the truth, if that makes sense. So those are kind of like the two big overarching values that I had and have that kind of guide my life and my principles these days. If that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%, mate. A great love of learning by the sounds of things. I'm curious, what is the hat that you're wearing now?
The hat I'm wearing now, the metaphorical hat, is, it's I act kind of like a guide to my clients, and then I'm also a father and a partner to my fiance. Happy to say, and business owner. There's a lot of hats happening all simultaneously. What's a hat but a label? So, someone I try not to describe myself too much in terms of the hats that I wear, because it's someone that I like. Is as soon as you label yourself, you put yourself in a box. So, continuously curious, ever expanding my what and trying to find a place where I feel satisfied, that I can predict the world and what people are kind of going through, based on what they say, without, telling them necessarily what they should do.
Yep. Like you say, playing the guide there, mate. What are you looking at now? So it sounds like you've got a great passion for a love of learning, and you're always exploring new things. What's driving the mission or driving the motivation for you right now?
Well, there's a lifelong thread that I've always wanted to be interested. I've always been very interested in psychology. Even in high school, I was very driven I was going to go get a PhD, clinical psychologist. And I got sidetracked because I learned about social psychology. And I said, oh, this is actually much more interesting than clinical psychology to me. Right. So, went to graduate school in social psychology, focusing on attitude and belief change, which kind of parallels the fact that, what do you believe really, and how flexible is that sort of belief structure that you have, and how does it built, and all that kind of stuff. So focus on that. Then I jumped over to get an MBA, and kind of quote unquote lost my way in terms of the my desire to help others, which was organic to me when I was younger, and about 10 years ago, it just kind of serendipitously fell into the role that I'm doing now, supporting and helping others, both men and women. We started with
Mm,
men, but most of my one-on-one people are actually women, and the retreats are rolling off into doing women's retreats starting in 2026 as well, using a similar format. So it's just about helping people, making the world a better place, because we're all uh, kinder with ourselves primarily. Once
mm,
we're kinder to ourselves, um, and we can be more kind to other people, and hopefully that flows out and has an impact on the world at large.
mm. You mentioned there that you lost direction, or you lost the desire to help others. Can we zoom in on that a little bit? What was going on in that part of your life, do you feel?
It's not that I lost desire to help others. That's always been kind of a driving kind of thing. But in terms of going into a career path, when I was finishing my MBA program, I got into an internship, and I'd always been a student. I had jobs and things like that, but I never like got a real a real paycheck. And when I was like,
Yeah.
wow, this is a lot of money. I said, this sounds pretty good. So just got distracted in that way. And it wasn't until about mm, 20 years later that maybe 25 years later that I went to Peru, and had a journey with ayahuasca, and then that sort of changed my life and my direction in a very humble, slow, and organic way. So that brought me back until like the realization, first with people asking me, and then with going out and just supporting people that weren't necessarily my friends or people I cared about before, but just people I knew, that kind of grew into growing a community and serving others.
Mm. In that 20 years that you were, building the career, as a lot
Mhm.
of guys do,
Mhm.
what did you learn about yourself there, do you think?
Hmm. I learned that um, sometimes it's better to just do something yourself and get it done. Um, that if I put my word on something, it's got to. If I put my word in somebody else's trust, I have to like vet it and check that out. I learned a lot about um, taking people with a grain of salt. That their story might not necessarily be reflecting the deeper truth. This is more recent, having to do with running. I was running a company with 65 employees, and lots of times people will say one thing, and then you delve into the story, and you find it's completely different. And so, you know, um, those are some deep truths. I learned that there was a sort of a dissatisfaction when I got out of was working for money rather than working for purpose, that I didn't realize until I started working for purpose, and I realized what was missing when I was just working for money. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
So
it
those would
does,
be some
mate.
things I learned.
Mm. What was the turning point that made you realize that you weren't working for purpose, or made you want to step out and go and explore, the different options that are there?
It wasn't a turning point so much, like one day I had this it wasn't that one day I had this realization that, oh my goodness, I'm not doing something that serves humanity in a deeper way. I'm selling products uh versus supporting people and healing and helping people heal themselves. Um it was very gradual, and there was a reluctance to owning that part of my mission. So it's only after the fact, after doing this now for like almost 10 years, or for
Mm.
doing it for 10 years, but being involved in the space for over 10 years, that I look back and see how much more deeply satisfying this part of my life is compared to, the just more pedestrian. Not that there's anything wrong with like working for money for a living and that being your end goal, but there's just a deeper satisfaction that comes with service to others.
Mm. Yep. Yep. You mentioned that, you went and did ayahuasca. What sparked that curiosity there for you to, jump into that journey?
Hmm. Basically, it wasn't my intention to go do that initially. I had been given the opportunity to, or been told by a coach to go do something outside of my regular life, outside of work, outside of my family, something solo. Just go on an adventure, hero's journey, maybe kind of thing. And my initial thing was to go kite surfing in the Philippines and learn how to kite surf. That was like number one. That's what I want to do. And through circumstance that didn't work out. And because my wife wanted to also participate in that, and that was not the point of the exercise. So then I just started rummaging through, and this was like, I don't know, between 10 and 12 years ago. I learned about ayahuasca, and I was like, well, this seems kind of interesting. Very skeptically, uh, as I might as well try it. This sounds kind of like an adventure. It fits all the nuggets, all the check boxes for what my intention was for this, this journey that I was supposed to take. So I flew to Peru by myself, went on this retreat, and then it opened up a door and gave me some realizations that I wasn't looking at the world maybe in the most generous light, put it mildly.
Hmm. Did you have expectations of what would happen before you went there?
None. I wrote it. The one thing I remember writing in my journal on the airplane ride down was, this could either be super profound or it could be a whole lot of nothing. That's like literally what I wrote. So I was like, hey, people say a lot about it, but remember, this was before it was really popular. So it got popularized after Michael Pollan's book, which came out like 3 or 4 years after I had gone to Peru. So when I was reading, it was mostly Reddit threads and some YouTube podcasts that were few and far between. The amount of content that's available now is huge, and my expectations would have been completely different. But it was kind of like, this seems very overblown and oversold, but who knows who knows what's going to happen. But changed my life, and frankly, I'm very grateful for that.
Can you walk us through that experience? Like, I'm curious. I've heard about it. I've never tried it myself, but I'm really curious to understand maybe what happened for you.
The first time I've done it like 40 times. So
Yeah, the first time, the
the
first
first
time.
time, the first time, yeah, it's kind of a funny story because I went in much less expectations than anyone would have now, because there's so much information now on the available about those experiences. So I came into it thinking it was going to be like a normal sort of mild to moderate psychedelic journey, and I really didn't know what to expect. And the person who was serving it said, prior to getting started, he was like, and remember, no matter what happens, if you just surrender to it, it'll be much easier for you. And in 4 hours, we'll just be sitting, 4 hours from now, we'll be sitting around here eating some fruit. And I say that because they were my guiding light in terms of words in the beginning. So it, you drank this stuff. Didn't taste very good. It wasn't as bad as I had expected it to taste, but so take it, you lay down on the mat, the lights are down, it's almost pitch black. And about 40 minutes later, you start to see things. You start to see like images and all this kind of stuff. My first thoughts was like, I'm getting the F out of here tomorrow. This is not for me. I was like, you think you're a big guy, you think you can take anything. This is outside of your pay grade. And I was just having a terrible, terrible time of it for about, let's say about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Felt like a lot longer, I'll tell you that. Very uncomfortable. It's the desire for control, and that is really, I learned over time that is the key to getting through one of these experiences either. So when you cede control, everything changes. So anyway, so that's what I did, because I remember the guy saying, if you just relax and surrender to it, it'll change. And I said, okay, I'm going to just try and relax here and surrender to this. And hopefully in 2 hours, I'll be fine and we'll be eating fruit, like you said. So almost as I ran through those words in my mind and I said, okay, just relax and breathe, um, everything changed. The whole perspective shifted. Once I like gave up my desire for it to be different than it was, not only my internal experience of how I was experiencing this scene that wasn't actually objectively, if I painted it for you, you would say it's actually quite beautiful, or there's nothing scary about this objectively, right? But once I changed my perspective and flipped my perspective to one of just allowing and surrendering to it, the feeling changed to this huge, expansive, I don't know, feeling of something much greater than myself. It was almost blissful. By blissful, I mean, it's, we don't have words in the English language actually to describe the level of, it wasn't pleasure. It wasn't bliss. It was just this amazing contact with something that was greater than myself. And as it rolled off, I was like, wow, I got to change a lot about things that I was thinking about. There's more. It just felt like there was just more to this human experience than I had kind of, bet the farm on. So yeah, life changing in that moment. 4 hours really flipped the switch in me. Yeah, that's how it went. Then I had some fruit afterwards with that guy and about 20 other people, and it was really good tasting fruit.
It's interesting. I've heard different things about it, and I think most people I've spoken to have had positive experiences, or they've come back with a shift in identity or a shift in their beliefs. What when you say things changed for you, was there an identity shift, or was there some beliefs that you had to let go of?
Well, the main one that people ask me about a lot of times because has to do with my metaphysical understanding. So metaphysics is kind of like the idea of what things are versus how things behave. So, and science doesn't really tell us about what things are. It tells us how things behave. We look at patterns and relationships between things and we make models based on those things, but the models aren't the thing in and of itself. That makes sense. So I had very much bought into the materialist, physicalist paradigm, which is like having to do with, matter is fundamental and consciousness is an emergent property of matter. Like if you organize matter in a certain way, like in a brain, for example, you're going to get consciousness. And because my psych program was very neurobiology based, it was pretty heavy science based psych program. And I said, oh, this makes sense. Okay. Then kind of bought into that and dismissed anything that was outside of that immediately. It was very kind of, I wouldn't say militaristic, but very close-minded about anything that couldn't be understood under, current scientific frameworks, current scientific tools that we have abilities to use to measure things by, then it doesn't exist for my mind. Right. And immediately when I had the experience that I had, I was like, okay, hold on. This experience that I'm having now is so much bigger than my regular day-to-day experience. And I had some conversation. I came back, big part of my journey was going back to my scientific training. And they were saying, everything is disprovable. This is our best guess. This is our best guess as to how things work right now. And it just did not make sense. It sent me on a 10-year journey reading in philosophy and stuff about different metaphysical modalities, and now I've landed on one that seems deeply satisfying to me, which is the one that was a little earth shattering for me, even though it's closer to what humans sort of believed for, until the mid 1800s. It's kind of the default sort of metaphysics that humans kind of go with, or maybe it's a little earlier than that, maybe 1600s. But in any case, it's like, oh, okay, this actually makes more sense. And, exploring that more deeply, finding out that this alternative sort of metaphysics called idealism actually fits and is solves a lot of gaps in some scientific conundrums that we have, that also feels deeply satisfying to my lived experience, having done, many, many journeys over time. That
Mm. When you say idealism, like if I'm someone that doesn't understand what you're trying to push
Mhm.
there, what do you mean by idealism?
Idealism is, well, there's three metaphysics, big main ones that they talk about in philosophy, right? So there's materialism, which is the one that they teach you in school, which is everything's matter and consciousness is an emergent property, strong emergence or soft emergence, emergent property of this matter. And then someone posed, and my ex-wife actually happened to be one of the intern editors of David Chalmers' book, that posed the hard problem of consciousness, which is, it's a dog here, which is how basically, now I can't remember the dog described me, but pose this question about how can consciousness arise from material, right? Stuff. And there's a bunch of more stuff in that book that it's also a bunch of philosophical problems that don't align with the current metaphysical materialist framework. And then the second one is panpsychism, which says that consciousness is a property of everything. So it's kind of a dualistic view. It, consciousness is a property of every single thing. Like even the desk has something akin to consciousness. And then the third one is idealism, which is very similar to like the Vedic tradition, that everything is consciousness. There is no actual matter the way we think it. Matter is what the world looks like through this dissociative boundary that is our feeling of separation through our perceptual system. And when I finally landed on that a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, okay, this one finally seems deeply satisfying. It answers and fits along with a lot of questions that I have. So the fundamental nature of reality is consciousness, or qualitative states that then are interpreted through our perceptual lenses, our eyes, our ears, our sense of touch, in such a way that we can move through the world, right? Because otherwise, if you didn't have these sensory apparatus, it would be very challenging to move through the world. Yeah.
Interesting. I get what you're saying there, and I suppose it's like consciousness is everything around us. Is the idea of idealism? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's even more than that. There is nothing but consciousness, right?
Yeah.
There is nothing but consciousness, and the world looks the way it looks, like through our, technically something called analytical idealism, is that there's a dissociative boundary that is a true. It has this like mathematical formula that shows how things are. There's a boundary between me and the rest of the world. It's called the Markov blanket. But anyway, you're perceiving things through this dissociative boundary, right? And in order to like make sense of and interact with the world, you have to see things in a certain way. And it's all qualitative states. The thing is solid, something's wet, all these kinds of stuff, and then I can make movements in the world through this perceptual system that gives me access to keep my metabolism going. But the Hindu, this is not a new idea. Like the Hindus came up with this, like, 5,000 years ago in the Hindu Valley. They just called the greater consciousness, they called it Brahman, and they called this dissociative, part of the totality of all of Brahman, they call it the Atman. And they basically had the same idea. But the idealist tradition, is as old as the hills in human tradition. And, it's most recently really articulated most well and put into modern scientific framework by a philosopher. He's a philosopher, but he's got 2 PhDs. This guy named Bernardo Castro, and his books and his writing and the interviews that I've watched of his really explain this quite clearly to me. It's kind of a big shot in terms of the people he talks with.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a fascinating concept, isn't it? And just how all the world connects in that way. In the experience that you had with ayahuasca, and you're saying feeling like you were part of something bigger, is that what you were feeling? Or now that you know more about this sort of consciousness, is that what you think maybe these plant medicines help us with?
Yeah, well, one of the conundrums, one of the great mysteries um, that's identified in the literature for neuroscience with psychedelics is the fact that psychedelics, well, before they had fMRIs, the assumption was that you take something like psilocybin or ayahuasca or whatever, and your brain actually increases its metabolism, right? It's doing more because you're experiencing more, right?
Mm,
So it lights up your brain like a Christmas tree, right? And so you see all these colors, you see all this stuff, and it's because your brain is just doing more. And when they put people in fMRIs, they see that specific regions of the brain actually go down in metabolism. And you can have a psychedelic experience under many circumstances that don't involve taking an exogenous substance into your brain. So, like fighter pilots and stuff that are put in those spinning machines, where the brain have less blood in their brain, they have something that they'll describe as like a near death experience. Or people who have had high dose psilocybin things will say that sounds exactly like what high dose psilocybin, like we're
mm,
describing the same thing. Or people who not recommended, but people who choke themselves for satisfaction, I'm talking about. They
mm,
also describe profound divine sort of experiences, and again, you're getting less oxygen to the brain. So there's this weird inverse relationship between the brain activities going down in certain regions of the brain and actual conscious experience. So the amount of what the world looks like feels way more, you know, more real than real, right? So how do you
mm,
explain that? There's if the brain is just creating the conscious narrative, right? Then how would one explain those things? Same thing, near death experiences, also very similar to many psychedelic experiences. Again, these people are in a hospital, their heart stops, they get less blood to the brain, and all of a sudden they're having these mystical experiences, and they put them in a fMRI, not necessarily people having a near death experience, but other things like that they can do. And then these people are having these profound experiential experiences, profound conscious experiences, but then their brain is actually um, not is doing less of what it normally does. So
mm,
it's a mystery right now in cognitive science as to how that relationship is. But it is
mm,
explained well with those, the that idealistic framework. It's just like, well, yeah, there's there's less of a filter. The brain is doing less of a filter. You can use a filter analogy. There's a bunch of different, you can do a radio analogy, which is an old kind of analogy from the Doors of Perception, Aldous Huxley kind of thing. So knows what's going on, but the materialist paradigm saying that the actual matter in your brain is causing, the experience, it's inversely correlated with what people experience with psychedelics, with any kind of lowering of brain metabolism, especially in specific areas of the brain. So it's weird, but it's what we got to work with
mm,
in terms of
mm.
our understanding.
Yeah. How did Michael's world change after that experience? Like when you came back to, let's call it reality, what did you start to notice, or what shifts did you start to notice?
Well, it was much more. There was a deeper feeling of gratitude for smaller things that I'd taken for granted, um, and that's been an ongoing deepening in me. Much more gratitude for the small things in life. There was and over the years, I think fundamentally the most impactful thing is much greater compassion for every human being, especially realizing, hearing all this, working with people, hearing their stories, and seeing like, wow, everybody's got this entire world of challenge that they're going through, and realizing that giving people a lot of grace for when they might not be behaving in an outward way that aligns with how I want them to behave. realizing that there's more going on for them, even things that I don't know, and just giving people grace in that way that is born out of compassion. It's just like, oh, they're having probably going through something. I don't know what's in their world, but I know that something is going on in their world. In Spanish, they have todo, uh, cada uno es un mundo. Every person's a world unto themselves, basically. Uh,
Mm.
and that's very much the truth. You work with people in deep, expanded states, and you realize how everything is, how these early experiences are foundational to how they react in the world today, right?
Mm.
And it's just a long train of this experience that they're having in the world, with all of its problems, all of its ways of being, and how they react to it that may not be causing them to be living the life they want to live, which is oftentimes much simpler than we think it has to do with, like, I need to be a success in this way. I need to make X amount of money, all this kind of way. And it's much, much simpler, um, to find that satisfaction and equanimity in one's life, um, than society and the world and social media tells us it is.
Mm. Did this like newfound gratitude and compassion and kindness, did that lead you to the work that you're doing today?
Oh, what led me to the work doing today was, mostly just people asking them, friends first, asking me to sit with them. Uh, the place I went to in Peru, they asked me to volunteer down there. They said, you have a real, people feel real easeful around you, make people feel safe in these experiences. And so, yeah, it just became organic. And before you know it, there's more and more people, word of mouth, did some trainings, got more involved in the community. And, you know, my, my partner in this, Yoni Havana, who, we started with the men's retreats, and like I said, expanding it to, got that dialed in really well, and now want to be able to serve more people, help more people, because everybody that comes to a men's retreat says, can my wife come to one of these? And I was like, not yet, we're going to do it soon enough. She would really like to. We have a unique, right now, we have a model in our retreats that I hope that other people will follow, because it's a little different, than most retreats. And I think the proof is in the pudding in terms of the outcomes that we get. So very happy to be doing this very slowly, very organically, very carefully, very, um, with really a sense of, like, there's no hurry. This is unfolding as it should.
You mentioned that your retreats are a bit unique. Can you let us in and show us what you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things is we do something, well, for starters, we're the only, um, kind of retreat program. It's more of a rite of passage thing. It's kind of
Mm.
like entering in through a gate, where we do something very similar to what you're doing. When you go to one of our retreats, the typical model is, you go to a retreat, uh, and then when the retreat's over, there might be like an integration call or two, maybe, probably more likely than not, there isn't kind of an integration call. And then it's basically goodbye, or maybe there's a little, an email that goes out every month or something, to half marketing, half support, whatever. But when you're done with one of our retreats, you enter into the community. So we have a whole bunch of we have a community, basically, that's, foundational on just a Telegram group. But then we run programs. We have growth groups. We continue the process, to grow and develop and support one another. And the wonderful thing is, everybody in this community has gone through the retreat, so they have this commonality, and they've already,
Mm.
you know, burst through those levels of, of of knowing how to be vulnerable, and knowing that the community that we have, we already kind of set the ground rules, so people are very comfortable being vulnerable, and know that some things that they might not be able to talk to their friends when they're watching football on a Sunday, right? They can easily, you know, talk about what's going on with them with one of the other gentlemen right now, just gentlemen, that have gone through the retreat, because we've all sort of ripped the Band-Aid off in terms of being scared about being vulnerable. We have challenges every year. There's some fasting challenges. There's some connection challenges, all kinds of other stuff. So we really try and engage that and ensure that there's a place for people to land, because coming out of some of these experiences can be very challenging because the world hasn't changed, but you've changed. And so sometimes there's some disconnection in terms of reentry into society, into family, into friend groups, because you've had these realizations. You're now more compassionate. You love yourself more. You're making change in your life, and everybody's looking at you like, well, you look like the same person. You're acting a little differently. You're acting a lot nicer. You're less snarky, all these kind of stuff. But like, what is really different? So that's a difficult thing. The other thing that we do that's very different from most retreats is that it's not just based on these experiences and kind of let you go. Like, our retreats are fully packed in terms of activities. There's very little downtime. And so we have a lot of content. Like, we do content on relationships. We do content on purpose. We do content on integration of the experiences themselves. There's a lot of circles, a lot of talking. There's not a lot of free time. So that's different from other retreats. And then the thing that's different from the way I was actually trained was we flipped the script on what we do, the order of the expanded states that we work with. So I don't want to get into specifics, but most retreats of this kind, or the kind of model, they'll do kind of an experience that gets people to lower their defenses and their fear kind of responses. It's a heart opening kind of experience at the beginning to kind of, and I always felt that was kind of artificial in terms of giving someone an experience that builds bonds in the beginning. So what we do is we do the hard stuff first, and then we do once people have made relationships at the retreat, we do the heart opening stuff at the end. And that is, I think, it's a way that I'm deeply committed to, in terms of like, I want natural relationships to form. People making relationships because they've gone through something difficult together, not because, they've had, some good conversations in the beginning. So I want them to have the real heart opening relational experience after they already have a relationship. That's really foundational and different from our roots. I don't know of any other retreat that does that in the order that we do it. It's kind of antithetical to the way I was, told to do it, or I should.
Taught to do it. Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you've got extra levels of support there and connection, and you've put a lot of thought into the structure of how you want your retreat to flow, and the connection there, and the work outside of obviously the actual ceremonies themselves. There's a lot of thought there. You mentioned there, like, obviously the vulnerability that comes with this. And a question that comes up for me is, like, I think a lot of men struggle with vulnerability, and maybe it's the definition of masculinity that we've been handed. There's a lot of walls that get put up in this experience. So I'm curious, like, your feelings around masculinity, and maybe before and after this sort of retreat or experience that you've been through, or you take others through.
Mm-hmm. So masculinity is a tricky subject because I think I have a pretty clear framework of what I think of as masculinity, right? So, and I think of masculine and feminine as labels for archetypes that are foundational to everything. So every culture has had some sort of representation of the masculine and the feminine. And it doesn't mean that, and we get caught up in our society as saying that masculine is male, for starters. So that's one thing, and that feminine is female. But if we think about them as like, sometimes I just change the wording so we don't get caught up in the masculine and feminine. And I'll say Shiva and Shakti, which I'm appropriating those words. So Shiva is a god that's basically pure consciousness, devotion. Everything that you see when you see a picture of Shiva is a still ocean. He's sitting on a lily, and he's in perfect meditation, pure order. And Shakti is his consort, right? And everything you see about her is pure energy. It's like she's dancing, she's got forearms, and she's moving, right? And together, the creation myth is together. They join, and that order put on energy creates the world, right? So all of us have these capacities, go now move back to masculine, feminine capacities in us, right? And masculine is basically the order, the direction, and the feminine is the energy that allows that direction to move in a direction. Actually, otherwise, you just get stillness. And I like to use the analogy of a rocket ship, right? You have a rocket and you have the energy from that rocket, right? The fuel. So if you just have the fuel, just have the feminine and just light a match to it, you're going to go poof, big explosion. It's just going to go nowhere, right? Same thing if you have a rocket ship, which would be like the masculine, and you have no energy behind it, no fuel. It's just going to sit on the launch pad. You need both together, and we have both of these archetypes, these capacities within us. So, so when we're thinking about masculine and feminine, or Shiva and Shakti, or whatever you want to call it, we're looking at the rocket ship and the energy. And what happens is people start seeing men behave in some ways that are not, conducive to society. And then we start thinking that has to do with the masculine. And it doesn't. What it has to do, if you look at the characteristics of the quote unquote toxic masculine, they have very little to do with the characteristics of the divine masculine. What they have to do with is their opposite of the characteristics that we'd think of as divinely feminine. So instead of intuitive, you're authoritarian. Instead of being flexible, you're controlling. Instead of being expressive, you're cold. Instead of being gentle, you're violent, right? Those are the toxic masculine characteristics happen when we retract away from that vulnerability, from that compassion, from that kindness, from those feminine, softer receiving kind of aspects. And then you would think logically, if there was a way to retract from that feminine and become, what we call in the West toxic masculine, what would happen if we retracted away from the masculine characteristics of logical self-awareness, unflappability, directness, courage? You actually have a Jungian archetype called the wounded feminine that no one talks about because they don't cause any problems to society, right? The people who are, if you talk about these two groups that are less useful for society to run well. So this toxic masculine and this wounded feminine archetype. Toxic masculine gets a lot of play because these guys are in prison, they're caught in crime, they're, ganging, doing gang violence, all these kinds of things. That's, they're controlling, they're abusing, all this kind of stuff. A lot of emphasis on that because it's visible impact on society. However, you have these, people shut away, the victim mentality, the cat women, the hoarders, all those kind of people who have no masculine capacity and they've retracted away from their masculine and they're in this wounded feminine archetype. But we don't talk about them because, they're basically society's throwaways. They don't cause any problems to anybody but themselves. So that is how I think about it. So now going to the retreat, we, as soon as someone comes to our retreat, walks through the door, they're going to find retreat facilitators who are deeply demonstrative of their divine masculine, of their Shiva and divine feminine things. We're happy to tell you anything about our lives that you ask about. Soft hugs, the whole business. And also there's a lot of order in our retreat. Like you're getting up at 5:30. Like there is, there's that ordered structure, but there's also kindness and gentleness and nurturing and healing. So that's how we work it in the retreats. And people talk about that in our reviews. As soon as I walked in the door, I knew that this was a different space. The facilitators were like it just made me feel safe, safe to express myself, to be who I am, to say those things that I haven't been able to say to others in the past. And we start our retreats with a gratitude and an intention setting ceremony. And there's always some tears. And the guys that walk through the door with their arms crossed, you're not going to crack me. By the first hour, they're already, somebody's sobbing and somebody's opening up already. Just because you got to model it. You got to show people that this is a safe place to be vulnerable, because no one's going to judge you. We've all done shit we're not proud of, right? So just how can we learn from that, move forward?
Awesome. I love that definition that you gave of masculinity there. And I like the way that you talk about men cracking, in a sense, because I think there's a lot of fear around that. We put up our barriers, we put up our walls, we don't want to be seen, we hide potentially the truth. Why do you think that environment that you create allows men to crack open?
That's a that's something that I think about all the time, because we want to have retreats that aren't just run by us, but we want to be able to like print that uh, and teach that and communicate that to others. But it has to be, all our facilitators have really done a lot of work on themselves. They have been enmeshed, and now, it's been 5 years, I think, that we've been doing these things. So we are, we have an easeful way about us that allows for someone to feel that this is the space that it's okay to say the things that maybe I've been holding back on. It's an okay space to allow those softer parts of myself to show up and see how that feels without, without any fear of ridicule or judgment. How do you do that? I think it takes facilitators who are very self-aware of their own reaction, and have and understand what's going on inside them, and can also communicate what's going on inside them in real time. So if someone says something that is, a little bit like, I don't know what they meant by that, the facilitator is going to immediately ask them, well, you just, either in that moment, it won't be forgotten. A flippant comment that's a little cold is not going to be forgotten. It'll be like, hey, earlier we had a conversation and you said this. What was that about? Like, what was going on with you? Or something like that. And then there's always a deeper layer. It's like, oh, well, maybe, I was feeling uncomfortable in the moment. And you give them the tools to be able to, like, understand what they're feeling in a more resolved way, and reflect back. Okay, so I'm hearing that you're about this, and like, what does that, and ask more questions from a curiosity base, not from a diagnostic base.
Mm.
So by having that conversation in a really open, vulnerable way, to say, like, I really want to understand what's going on. So I'm not offended by it. I just want to understand, because I'm
Mm.
curious about you, and I'm curious about your internal world and what's going on for you, and how I can best support you, and how you can best support me, honestly, too. So we can move forward in the space. And then just basically by learning by doing. Like I said, there's so much interaction that happens in terms of talking. There's plenty of opportunities for that. But it's a dance. But you have to know what's going on inside you, to facilitate one of these things, so that, like, ooh, if someone does say, because we're all humans, something does say that triggers me, and I'm not easily triggered at all by almost anything at this point. But just from practice,
Mm.
from paying attention, okay, if I do get triggered by something, or if I were to get triggered, like, say, okay, this touched something in me. Maybe why is that touching, and explore that in myself, and then have a conversation about it, and say, wow, this reminder, and even talk about it. Like you said, someone said this, and like, I reminded me of something that someone said in the past, and I made that analysis over myself. So you're teaching a tool that they can use for themselves to understand when they get triggered, of how to like go inside and think, and like kind of like process that and work through that, so it doesn't affect them in the future. And then the next time the same thing happens, and that it just doesn't affect them the same way, because they've already processed that thing that caused them to have a triggering moment.
Mm. It's so powerful. It's like, I think we overlook sometimes the healing capacity or the awareness capacity from being in a group where there's no judgment, and
Mm-hmm.
where we're just there with curiosity, asking the powerful questions, but not trying to fix, and just having that space to be able to talk. And I see this in the small men's groups that I run as well. It's just like creating a space where men can talk gives them the opportunity to say stuff that they probably never told anyone else, and just sort of
Right.
open up like you're saying, which is such a
Totally.
powerful tool. And I like how you say that, you feel, the tension maybe, or what's coming up for you, and then you question it more. Like, why is that causing me to feel this way? I feel a lot of us in society don't slow down enough to be able to get curious about these sort of things and pay attention to these sort of things. What sort of transformations are you seeing with men, particularly when they have these experiences on the retreats that you run?
Oof. I mean, we've had a lot of people who have just given up drinking, and like we don't promise anything. So something I wanted to say prior, and then I'll answer the question, is that I'm not there to heal anybody, right? I'm not the healer, right? We are there to make a container where you can heal yourself. So we offer opportunities, we offer experiences, we offer some guidance, some information, but really all the work is in your hands. So first and foremost, you are responsible for yourself. Don't look to me to fix you, right? I can set a container. I can ask you questions and whatnot, but the person who's going to fix themselves is you, and not in a directed, like, I want to get to here, so this is going to be like a linear chain of events. You're going to have to work through some stuff. So there, to put that. So anything someone wants to change, they already know they want to change it. They just can't. They haven't found the chain of the logical or cognitive or emotional chain that leads to that change happening for whatever reason. Somebody who's going to the bar every night and, pounding 8 IPAs and says at the next morning, I'm never going to do that again. And then finds themselves at the same bar the next night, saying the same thing in that cycle. They know what they do. They just they can't find the logical chain of, not logical, but the chain of experience or the change of awareness that is going to fit the key to unlock the door so that they can get better. Right. And, so what has changed? A lot of people have given up drinking. A lot of people have given up marijuana, pornography, reliance on pornography. A lot of people have vastly, this is one of the main things, vastly improved their love relationships with their partners. Looked at how they engage with their children in a different way. Learn to trust their kids more. Learn to realize the kids are. I'm just recalling this from the last retreat. Someone's like, their daughter was going to do something and bring a boyfriend over for Thanksgiving, and dad was like not having it. And then the realization, my setting of this rule for this, grown ass adult woman is demonstrating to her that I don't trust her. And that's the message I'm sending her. If she thinks I don't trust her, she's not going to be open with me. And this is causing this, in a broader sense, is causing a rift in my relationship. What if I just trusted her? And change his whole perspective on that, amongst other things. Like, I'm getting triggered by so much stuff in society that is about me making assumptions about what other people are thinking when they might not even be thinking this. Every person is so unique and so crystalline in their own problem set that it's hard to say like what are main themes. Basically, it's just like giving up some habits that don't serve, whether they be substance abuse related, whether they be behavioral doom scrolling, social media related, whether they be withdrawing in the relationships into dopaminergic substances that are, meeting some needs that could be otherwise met by having a deeper relationship with your partner. It's, starting a morning routine, having more discipline with oneself, being more expressive, saying hello to the people in the grocery store, all those things, they just change, and they're part of the same underlying sort of change mechanism. So it's about self-awareness. You can't change anything you're not aware of.
You say on your website that 90% of men leave the retreat dropping a destructive, at least one destructive habit. Why do you think that is?
I think that has more to do with the post-retreat stuff that we do, the community that we build. So we're working on this kind of promotional video for our nonprofit, so that we can show people what we're doing, and hopefully be able to support some people that are in need that cannot afford these things, because they are expensive. Our houses that we go to are super posh, super nice. The food is super. It's a high ticket event to run, and so because they come out of, one guy says, he's like, I know that I'm in a community of guys, and I'm not going to let them down because they're not going to let me down. And I know I have to do the work because they're doing the work. And so I think, like, sure, the retreat is the retreat. And it is, I think we go deeper than most kind of retreats are. We have a higher facilitator to participant ratio than any retreat because of that fact. So the work is a little harder, more challenging in it. But then when you come out the other side, you are put into a community of people who are going to watch out for you, who are there for you, and you don't have to kind of figure it out on your own. So you're not just left to like figure it out. Like, hey, I'm struggling with this, with my, this is going on. Like, what can we do? We also like we have a hotline if someone's really in some kind of crisis, which has only been used a couple of times. We can post in the hotline, and not a facilitator necessarily, but someone from the community will reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on, man? I'm up now at 2 a.m. and I saw that you're having a hard time. What's going on? So it's about the community afterwards. It's about the support system afterwards. That's probably why the results, if I'm to be perfectly frank, is probably why the results are so much higher, I think, than most people. Most people have like the bliss, they get blissed out, or they have this great experience to come back floating on air. And then as they dive back into their lives, the shine kind of comes off the apple. And they don't have the support and the post integration support to help them, feel supported, have people that can talk about their experiences, journeys, experiences at the retreat and after the retreat, their struggles, all that kind of stuff. It's not made available to them. They're coming back to, say, a flyover state in the United States, and they can't talk to anybody about, you go to Peru, you have an ayahuasca experience, and you come back and you flying into Iowa. Like, who are you going to talk to about that? Like, really, honestly, they'll think you're crazy or you're worshiping the devil or something like that. That I'm saying these things not to be like stereotypical, but things that people have told me, that people that they know have told them. So it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. The power of the connection through the community and the power of accountability, the shift that it can make. And it's often overlooked, isn't it? It's something that's not easy to measure, but just being in that environment, and, we are the environment and the people we surround ourselves with. So that connection that you're creating and the ongoing support is giving people, that accountability to keep moving forward, which must be pretty rewarding to be in your position, to be able to see the transformation happen, but also to be able to see the community staying strong after the retreat.
Yeah, I think I am grateful to all the guys, especially the guys who are, there's like 50% of the people that are very engaged, and there's like 50% people who engage when they need, and they lurking and they pop off once a month or something like that. But I'm grateful to all of them. I myself, for me, the greatest benefit that I've gotten is that to deeply know so many folks at a level that is more intimate, more vulnerable, more more filled with grace than maybe anybody else in the world knows them. And to be given that trust of, I can call Michael and tell him something, and vice versa. I have guys in the community that have come to a retreat, but I become friends with, and where I can call them and say, say, hey, what's going on? This is going on with me, kind of thing, and speak to them in a way that I will not find. It'll be a rare event for me to find somebody, or it would take a lot of effort and a lot of numbers, a lot of repetitions with different people to find somebody with whom I myself can be, feel comfortable to share in that way. Now, I am very comfortable to share with anybody, anything, but in terms of, you know what I mean? It's like, is it going to be, am I wasting my time? Because I don't care if you're going to judge me. Are you going to listen to me? Are you going to make the effort to understand me? Most people won't. So, it is what it is.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like, we have mates that we've known for a very long time, maybe mates we've grown up with, we've played sport with, and the conversations that we have are very surface level. And to be able to build the level of trust, but also have the tools to be able to support each other, just don't exist in our society until we do something like the retreat you're talking about, or until we do that inner work and we develop those tools to be curious, to listen, and not to try and fix. And we definitely need more of it. I think, men's health and our society's health is suffering because we don't have those tools. And it sounds like you're doing a great job at cracking men open, but also supporting them through the journey after that. Just on like the ayahuasca and on the psychedelics, what are some misconceptions do you feel around that?
Misconceptions are that the main misconception is that doing some kind of expanded state, whether it's that breathwork, whatever, that's the end of the journey. You're going to go through this gate and you're going to come out like quote unquote healed, right? That is the number one misconception. Um, you have to you go through the experience, whatever that experience is, whatever kind of expanded state modality you're using, and you get a download. What's the download? You get some understanding about your life and how you relate to the world in your lived experience. Some clarity. You look at your life from a different frame of reference. Okay. Now, with that new sort of information, what are you going to do with it? That's where the magic happens, because the ceremony actually starts when the ceremony's over, right? When you go out into the world, okay, I know that this, that, and the other thing is not serving me, or I'm relating to this person poorly, or I really need to pay attention and call my mom more, or whatever the heck the things are, you coming back. And if you choose not to take those actions that you have come up with yourself, right? It's not, you can go to therapists. Therapists don't even tell you what to do, right? They just listen to you and they kind of try and steer you in the right direction. But unless you're doing like cognitive behavioral or something like that, where they're giving you some tools. But anyway, you get the download. Now, what you do with it is going to be, it's on you. Basically, it's always on you. So that's the number one misconception, is that they think that it ends after, right after an experience. Like the retreat's over, and yes, you're going to feel this glow, this amazing thing, but you need to like cultivate that. You basically till the soil. Now you got to grow the plants. That would be the number one thing. The other thing, I'll give you two. The other thing is that this whole like quote unquote bad trip is just, it's completely unnecessary. Those things happen when people haven't been properly guided and don't have a support, somebody outside that's watching over them that can help them get out of a thought loop or something like that. Nothing is really, I've yet to see, and I've seen hundreds of people, nothing is objectively scary. You're not going to see a dragon eating you alive or anything like that. That's like ridiculous, right? It just doesn't happen. I mean, maybe it happened once in a while. You can find it on Reddit. I'm sure someone said it. But for the most part, it's just like things come up into awareness. Your quote unquote bad trip is that that we're always there and then you just didn't want to see it. You've been ignoring this thing. Like, I was like, let's say I was shitty to this person, right? And I always know I've been shitty to that person and I don't want to admit it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, you've been shitty to that person, right? And then now you have to deal with it. And like, I didn't want to hear that I was shitty to that person. So that's a bad trip. And so then you start ruminating on it and like, oh, what can I do about it? Blah, 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 blah. I get thought in a thought loop. And then if you have about it and like feel bad about yourself and all that kind of stuff, that is what a bad trip is, like feels like. But if you don't have the experience going into one of these journeys to be able to like understand like, oh, I'm having this thought that's a piece of awareness that was outside. It's not something I feel super great about myself. Like, all right, I'm going to make sure I remember to take care of that issue when this is over. Let's move on to the next thing. And if you don't have the experience of having, worked with this sort of stuff multiple times so that you have the awareness and the understanding in the space itself to be able to like direct yourself out of it through breath work, through breathing, through like calming your nervous system, through like a variety of different things you can do. Then you have a guide outside that can help you. Like, oh, I'm having a really hard time. I'm thinking about this thing. All right, let's talk about it, and like bring them into their bodies, there's a lot of things you can do to get out of that quote unquote bad trip. So those are the two main things that are really unnecessary. And that's why I don't think people should be doing these things unless they have a lot of experience, by themselves, because, I've seen people have incredibly powerful, intense, quote unquote, bad trip like experiences doing, breath work, like holotropic breath work, having themselves a rough time, and facilitator didn't kind of like support them in the way they do. And it's like, it looks terrible to be them in that moment. And they're just breathing. like a lot. That's it. But things are coming up. So
Yeah.
those are the two things.
So it sounds like what separates the men who transform from the men who relapse is the integration of them being able to take, the download and then being able to apply it to their life when they get back into the real world.
100%, 100%. Yeah. It is, they talk about it in terms of lip service in the expanded states communities, like, oh, integration is so important. Integration is so important. Come to my retreat. We do integration. We do 2 calls afterwards and see you later. That's not right. I mean, that's not enough. That isn't going to move the needle in a long-term way. Like, you need to be working with a therapist. You need to be working with a coach, with somebody that knows, can help you with moving what you decided to the material you decided to engage with and want to engage with in your life. You need to be working on a long-term basis because habits aren't made in a day. You know that. I know that. Changes aren't made in a day. Like, you may be really motivated. It's like, it's kind of like almost like New Year's resolutions. It's a lot more deep than that. Like, oh my God, I got to get help. I got to start eating healthy or whatnot. Well, you'll lose interest in 3 or 4 days if someone's not, if you're not talking about it and keeping that goal in mind until you make that habit a habit. So yeah, it's 100% what you just said. Without real integration, not just lip service to it, you're really not going to move the needle much.
Do you see psychedelics as a one and done, or is it something that we revisit at a certain interval, or when we feel ready to? Like, what's the process moving forward here?
All right. So this is what I tell folks with expanded states is you have your experience, right? You work on the things on your downloads or whatever, you have your experience, you work on the stuff. And at some point in stuff, you will plateau, just like going to the gym or doing something. You're doing the same exercise every day. You work on this and you're like, okay, it's time. At this point in time, I have integrated what I've learned. I'm ready to move on to the next stage. At that point in time, when you feel like, all right, I've extracted all the juice from this orange, what more, right? And what happens is, at that point in time, then it's time to do another journey. Not before then. You have a lot of people who are not addicted in the regular way, but who continuously do these expanded states because they're looking for that kind of connection with the divine, that bliss. They like to have the downloads, but they don't want to do the work afterwards, right? And so they keep going to these things, and they talk about, oh yeah, I still got to do this. I'm in a bad relationship, all this kind of stuff. And they just keep hammering along the same drug, but they're loving the experience, but they're not doing the work afterwards, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like getting the download, acting and integrating that information. And then once that part has been, quote unquote, let's say fixed, or you've got more control over that, if there's more work that you want to do, going back and seeing what the next download is.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've noticed is, like, for people who've worked with me multiple times, the first journey is always about childhood trauma. It's always about stuff from early days or something they're working with right now, but it's all related to like working and processing on the ways, kind of their early experiences or ways of being, or like beliefs, or finding core beliefs that don't serve them. And they're like looking at, well, I believe that I have to be perfect to be loved. That's like a very common one. If I'm not, because mom and dad only gave me love when I was, successful. So that's just like one example. Say, put these into relief. They realize these kind of things. They make changes in their life. And then when they come back to the well, as these things sort of like have been processed and worked through, then the future journeys actually become more spiritual. Some people bypass and they get a taste for that spiritual stuff, the connection with the divine right away. And they're like, oh, that's all there is. My life's still a shit show, but I can at least go reach, taste this divine thing. But when you're working with me, we're really working on the trauma, the belief systems, the structural sort of things, working through that. Maybe there's a taste of the divine, but we don't emphasize that too much, aside from like how maybe amazing that was, and like talk about that, work through it. But after they've done a few and they've actually integrated it, then kind of, I don't want to say move into it, but then the experience become much more, tend to become much more divinely connected. I think because what's most important, people are like an onion, right? So what's most important is it's going to go from the outside to the inside, right? So what's most important is like the stuff that's not working in my life right now that I want to fix. That's when it's going to come up. Like, I got to fix this. I got to do this. I got to get in a relationship, or why am I doing this? Or why am I unhealthy, or whatever it is? That's what's going to come up first. And as you start working on those things, what's left is just connecting to yourself, who you are, without the labels that you have used all your life to define yourself.
Why do you think that outer layer of the onion is the childhood trauma for a lot of people?
Why do I think?
Mm.
Because usually that's childhood trauma is, I use that word, but it's childhood, childhood strategies, childish strategies, childhood ego strategies, right? So when you're a kid, you don't have, no one teaches you what, how the world works, right? So you're kind of at a trial and error feedback loop with the environment, whether they be your parents, your friends, all this kind of stuff. And certain things work and certain things don't work. Many of these strategies, beliefs don't work in the adult world, right? But they worked when you're a child. And so you go on through life, using these same strategies, having these same beliefs about yourself, about others, about the world that don't actually fit into adulthood. And so these, more often than not, are the cause of a lot of your issues, you know, like that one I just used, I'm only loved if I'm perfect, right? Okay. Well, guess who's perfect when they're an adult? Absolutely effing nobody. So that's going to, all of a sudden, then you're going to get a lot of stress about like, oh my God. And it's, the smallest failures, a catastrophe, all this kind of stuff. I can't get out of my own way. I'm depressed, all these kinds of things because I'm adapting. My world view has never adapted from how it looked like as a child, where there was very clear in a small world, limited feedback loop, to get you these things. And so that's what's causing most of our problems when we're adults for most people. It's something that we learned as a child that we've over extrapolated to our experience now. And that's it. So then when you realize, oh, hold on, this isn't serving me at all. Like this isn't real. This is a false narrative that I've been like running my life. That this operating system I've been running is full of viruses, right? So clean up the viruses, and now it's like, oh, okay, life's a lot easier. Okay, so then now what? And then you have your identity isn't all labeled with all these kinds of beliefs and things like that. So that's why I think how it works.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I like it. Is psychedelics for everyone, or is there certain people do you feel that probably shouldn't?
Well, no extended states are for everybody, because I mean, if we're talking about psychedelics per se, there are certain medications that are contraindicated. It can be intense, so you want to be healthy. You want to be all those kind of stuff. Even breath work is like can be super intense, can elevate your heart rate. Some people who are, listen, I'm going to go on the record, but also I think the personality disorders, narcissistic personality disorder, sociopathy, and, those ones that are bipolar, those, what they call the personality disorders. I don't think, expanded states help with those people at all. I haven't seen it work. Even anecdotally, I haven't seen it work, aside from people who are misdiagnosed and then they go back, well, you were never bipolar in the first place. I don't know why you're in my office. And then those kind of people, it works. But I think I don't know enough about personality disorders to like know why. Maybe they are more organic or whatnot. I don't know what the deal is. But for like people who are struggling with life and maybe are even like experiencing depression. I mean, that's what they're studying, right? FDA in the United States gave special access for psilocybin to be used for treatment-resistant depression because it's treatment resistant. And then you get a 60%, under their protocol, which is a very rigorous, very tightly defined, very, I'm going to say scientific in terms of it's a very limited protocol. It doesn't allow for artful guiding. It allows for like you have to fit that thing, and they get like 60% like improvement on depression.
Mm.
So if it's done with skilled people with a lot of experience who have a little more a little are able to be a little more flexible and don't have to be restricted to the protocol of the research design, you're going to get, I think, so I think you're
Mm.
going to get even more better results. But that is going to be based on just like anything else, just like therapy, just like a lawyer, just like anything else. There's an art to all these things as there is a process. And then there's also an art. Like you can follow the recipe book, and then there's a great lawyer versus a not a very great lawyer. Has to do with their use of their intuition, of thinking outside the box, of being really present in the space, of looking at different ways to like facilitate and serve their client. So that's going to be additive to uh, the baseline therapeutic sort of modality with expanded states, which is very tightly regulated in what you can and cannot say or do, or the processes, because we need for scientific rigor for those things to not be all over the map. Because then is it the therapy or is it the expanded state? What is it? We don't know. So we got to like really restrict what we can do in a research protocol so that we
Mm.
can know what the modality is actually leading to what result. But it doesn't mean
Mm.
that in the real world, somebody who's skilled is not going to have a better outcome than someone who's less skilled.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. And like you've said all along, it's like the integration, the part that happens after that, not just in the window of the actual,
Yeah.
exposure. Yeah. If men are listening and they're curious about these open states, what advice have you got for them?
I would say be very cautious. Avoid anybody who calls themselves a shaman. It's like just write them out. Uh, that would be the main thing. Anybody who says I'm a shaman, just like
Yeah.
say thank you very much. I'm not interested in working with you. Anybody who takes away your ownership of your experience, or wants to tell, tell you what to do, you know, um, or interprets your experience for you, um, I would say avoid that kind of people. I would say very much talk to anybody who's going to guide you in an expanded states for some while, and really pay attention to their vibe. Like, do you feel safe with them, comfortable with them? Do, do you feel that they are curious about you? Do you feel judged at all? Because anything that happens in an expanded state is going to be amplified. And if you feel that you're being a little judged by somebody when you're talking to them on the Zoom, guess what's going to happen when you're doing uh, when you're doing some deep breath work? All of a sudden, you're going to think they're looking at me funny. They think I'm breathing funny or whatever. It's going to be elevated. So make sure that you really feel the person's quote unquote energy, not to get woo woo, but I mean, their vibe, that you
Mm.
vibe with them, and that you feel that they get you in some level, and that they are listening to you at every level, not just at some level, not just surface repeating what you're saying, but that they're really listening to you in a deep manner, and that you feel heard and understood, and they're asking you questions and they're just going through a checklist to get you through, um, get you into a retreat, or get you into working with them. Yeah, you should do that with anybody. If you're working with a coach, with a therapist,
Mm.
that's good advice for anything. So that's what,
Yeah.
but avoid anybody who calls themselves a shaman. Just like get them, you know, unless they're from, Siberia and they actually are a shaman, where the word came from, just avoid those people.
Mm. Why do you say that?
Because people in the West who call themselves shamans usually, I'll give you a story. Those people, um, so someone came to me, called themselves a shaman, and said, "Hey, I think you can help this person, right? I think they're possessed by somebody and all this kind of stuff." And I'm like, okay, there's possessed by a demon or something like that. And when you actually, if you're telling somebody that they're possessed, right? Which is like, how are you going to prove that? Like, I think there's something psychological going on here. There's something that needs to be worked on, some kind of trauma. That's my kind of base belief. I'm not saying that people have never been possessed. I'm not saying that those things don't exist, but don't jump to that as your first conclusion and freak someone out and give them now an additional level of trauma and complex because you have a narrative that like anybody who's acting out of the norm or experiencing some kind of behavior that isn't typical, that it has to be because it's some entity or something is attached to them. That's not super helpful. That's gonna,
Mm.
first of all, I don't know how to take care of that. So why are you
Yeah.
asking me? First of all, and second of all, I don't think it's good for the person because then it takes the onus of their own control and the onus of their own power from them because it's not me. It's not something that I got to work on. It's this entity that I need to get released. Taking all this money from this person and, to help hear them and exercise them, all that kind of stuff. And it's not what they needed, you know?
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and also, they'll give you a lot of stuff that cannot be verified. They'll tell you that you came from the planet Archimedes or something like that, and that your past life tells you this and the other thing. And again, I'm not at all saying that there isn't past lives, all this kind of stuff. But when someone tells me what they know about something about my past life, it's going to be super suspect. Like
Mm.
that's not diagnostic or useful for me right now. Maybe some of the themes, but some of notice the themes when I'm working with and what material I'm engaged in right now in this minute. But, keep some of those other, things that you're claiming as facts out of my window of experience and out of my kind of thought process, because I need to work on what my lived experience now is in the moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you've said it through the whole podcast, Michael, and it's what I really like about the story that you've shared. It's all the way along, you've been there with curiosity and you've been there to support and guide. You're not there to tell, you're not there to direct, you're not there to heal someone. They're the words that you've said. You're letting them have their own experience and allowing them to download that information and do with it what they need to do with it, which I think is, like you say, the positive way forward instead of being thrown these ideas or these, you're possessed or your past life XYZ, when really we don't know that. And through coaching, it's the same idea. We're there to guide and support, but at the end of the day, the work needs to be done by the individual, which you've also said. Is there anything that I haven't covered? Any question I should have asked through this whole episode, Michael, that you want to add here?
You got some really good questions. It's been a lot of fun. Um, enjoy talking. I can't think about nothing's coming immediately to mind. I can give one point of advice that you already mentioned, and you can get through more of life easier, more easily, more peacefully. And you said it yourself, so I'm just reiterating because I was like, yes, slow the F down, make more space before you respond to somebody in every case. If you slow down, you have more time to think. So much of our reactions happen from moving too fast and jumping to the next thing without having explored our internal world first. And if you start exploring your internal world just by slowing down, you'll make a lot more progress. It feels slower in the moment because you're like, oh, but I need to go move fast and fast. But it'll save you a lot of time. It'll save you a lot of anxiety. It'll save you a lot of, you know, over the long term, over the course of a week, a month, a year, if you slow down, you actually get a lot more done than if you rush through things and make a lot of mistakes because you're not doing things consciously and with presence and with grace. That would be what I would just want to emphasize. Whether or not you ever engage in expanded states or anything, it's just slow down. You're going to get 80% there.
I resonate with exactly what you're saying, and I'm
Right?
guilty of. I'm guilty of, like we all are, of trying to get through life too
Yeah.
fast, mate. The never-ending to-do list that we just want to tick off. But I find that when I do slow down and prioritize and set boundaries, life just feels so much better. So I agree with what you're saying there. My last question before we finish up, Michael, is what's the legacy you hope to build?
I I'm writing on something my son told me once. is I asked him, I said, I was lamenting that I had made some kind of minor parenting thing. And I was like, you know what? I wish I had done this differently and blah, blah, blah. And he said, you're a really good dad. And I said, well, yeah, how would you describe me? He said, you never get angry and you're very wise. So I was like, oh, okay. Okay, I'll take it. Yeah. It was like the nicest thing I think I've ever heard from anybody. And it came from my son. So I was like, all right, if that's the legacy I'm leaving with you, I will take that. That's good enough for me.
That's beautiful, mate. I love that. And I love the fact that it came from your son.
Me too.
Michael, if people want to learn more about the work that you do, how can they get in touch? Where can they go?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to michaeltiernoguide.com. michaeltiernoguide.com. There's a little consult or invite at the top. Anybody can go there. And if I was thinking about this as we were talking, if trying something new, if someone wants to email me at michael at michaeltiernoguide.com and they mention this podcast, I'll do a 90-minute like guiding coaching session, no expanded states, but just try and solve one or two problems in their lives just by asking questions and directing. Something that I do also, because not everything is about needs expanded states, but happy to do that 90-minute session for 4 people from this podcast. So I'll keep track.
Awesome, mate. I'll put the details in the show notes so people can connect there. But I'm truly grateful for your time. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot through this conversation. You're quite easy to talk to. You're a wealth of information. You know your stuff, and I greatly appreciate it. What stood out for me in this conversation is midlife isn't a crisis. It's a reckoning, a moment where the old strategies stop working and honesty becomes unavoidable. I'm not talking about honesty with the world, but honesty with yourself. Michael reminds us that strength isn't about holding it all together forever. It's about knowing when to stop pretending and start reconnecting. If this episode resonates, I want to invite you into the Midlife Mavericks Brotherhood, a space for men who are ready to lead themselves with clarity, integrity, and support. Before you go, reflect on this. What mask are you still wearing? Where are you emotionally untrained? Who are you meant to walk this next chapter with? Thanks for showing up and listening to this conversation. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, support this podcast, and tune in next time.